news gang is here tonight. The end of reggae, or is it? The beats from the court and the heat everywhere. We have the what, the why, and the road ahead. Also, Senate, check. National Assembly, check. Not so the courts. Who missed the plot? On the kicker, the line between politics and flood waters. Yvonne takes on our examination exuberance. The punchline impeaches the impeachment process. And on the angle, the animal farm, that is our education system.
A declaration is hereby made that the President does not have authority under the Constitution to initiate changes to the Constitution, and that a constitutional amendment can only be initiated by Parliament through a parliamentary initiative and Article 256, or through a popular initiative and Article 257 of the Constitution. 4. A declaration is hereby made that the Steering Committee on the implementation of the Building Bridges to a United Kenya Task Force report established by the President, V-Day, Kenya Gazette Notice number 264 of 3rd January 2020, and published in a special issue of the Kenya Gazette of 10th January 2020, is an unconstitutional and unlawful entity.
Wow, wow. It doesn't get more damning than that. And ladies and gentlemen, I should say actually that Jamila is on break tonight, and Wilson Mushora is on tonight as our sign language gangster. Ladies and gentlemen, I think it is fair to just start quickly with the one thing that stood out for you. Obviously, we'll go into the finer details of this. Linus.
Well, Joe, quite a dark night for promoters of the BBI, particularly President Uhuru Kenyatta and the ODM leader Raila Odinga, because this was such a stinging indictment of the process by the High Court. Remember, what the High Court did here today is to audit how the process has been conducted. Are you conducting it in accordance with the Constitution? Are you observing the existing Constitution as you seek, even as you seek to amend it? And I think the indictment is very, very severe. You also have, on a personal level, the President being held accountable for being in violation of Chapter 6 of the Constitution, specific Article 73, integrity clauses. This is not nice. This is a stain on the President's image. And when you look at it in the totality of it, you will then relate the events of the day to those of the 1st of September 2017. I mean, when you're watching this and listening to those judges, there was that echo of David Maraga and the ruling that nullified the presidential election, because even as he started to speak, it started sounding impossible. Are you going there? Mm-hmm. But here is a team of 5 judges, just like the weather that was pounding so hard today, went hammer and tongs for the BBI process, BBI proponents. They faulted not just the BBI promoters, but also the process, and IEBC, another very, very bad night. I mean, compared to what the ruling also said in 2017 about bungling the election process, this is not looking very good. So we are all looking forward to hearing what the President will say, what ODM leader Raila Odinga will say, what the now unconstitutional steering committee and task force of the BBI will say. Our friend lawyer Paul Mwangi, we would like to hear what they have to say about the night.
Very interesting. But for now, let's hear what Francis has to say.
Interesting. From the onset, if the BBI process was going to stop, it was going to be stopped by the courts, eventually. And when the 7 petitions were filed, there were telltale signs that there were some very fundamental issues that they were raising, particularly on the process, how the BBI was initiated, how the Constitution Amendment Bill 2020 was crafted, the question of public participation, the question of availability of the bill for Kenyans to read so that they acquaint themselves with the content of the process. So, as at the very early stages of the judgment, you could tell where it was heading to. Actually, it reminded me of that Supreme Court nullification of the presidential election results in 2017, where the then Chief Justice, while reading, first of all talked about the process as opposed to the outcome. Mm-hmm. And here, the same trend was followed, the process, first of all. And you could tell from the historical perspectives, right from CKRC, how the Constitution amendment process has been carried out previously, and then there was an immediate comparison to the Building Bridges Initiative-driven constitutional amendments. And therein you could tell where the direction was heading to. And so the process versus the outcome. But there are some interesting things that I also saw that were being raised previously, but have come to the fore here. Who initiated the Building Bridges Initiative? Who initiated the proposals to amend the Constitution through BBI? If it is President Uhuru Kenyatta and ODM leader Raila Odinga, can it be deemed a popular initiative in strict reading of it? Can one say the president is the president on one hand and is also a citizen on the other? Can the president initiate the process of amending the Constitution through popular initiative? Bearing in mind that at one point he also has a role to play in the course of this popular initiative. So there are some fundamental issues that were being raised then and that have also been raised in the judgment today, and tells you something interesting.
But it was interesting on that particular issue that what they seemed to be saying was that they actually kind of ignored the whole politics and everything, and the reason why they held that the president is the one who started this thing was because he's the one who appointed the task force, and which then gave birth to the steering committee, which then gave rise to this whole process, initiated in fact the whole process of amending the Constitution, collecting signatures and everything. And so actually they made a declaration that it is the president who initiated this thing by dint of having appointed that committee.
And a quick one, at the same time, you remember the whole question that was being raised. Is this a government initiative? If it is a government initiative, is it being funded through public resources? If that is the case, then is it a government project or a citizen initiative? Because a strict reading of the popular initiative route entails that it will be started by a private citizen and then look for other private citizens to support the process through collection of signatures and everything else. So the moment the government hand came into it, then a series of questions began to be raised.
Yvonne?
I think for me, the reflection goes back to when the president said that he discerns a constitutional moment. And I think we all question that around this table, whether there was indeed a momentum and this was something that was driven by the people or from that level. What stood out for me today was, I think, just to pick up on what Linus has said, this went beyond former Chief Justice David Maraga. In my perhaps my less experience than others on this table, I do not think I've ever seen, a judiciary be so stinging and directed at the president, where it didn't just say the presidency, but they named him by name, and they said, President Uhuru Kenyatta violated Article 131(2)(c) of the Constitution of Kenya. He has failed to respect, uphold, and safeguard the Constitution. He has failed the leadership and integrity test under Article 73. And it's important to remember that earlier on they had said that he can be sued in his personal or official capacity in the execution of the duties of his office. I am not sure that we have seen such a stinging indictment on not just the office of the president, but the individual who occupies that seat at the moment. And what happens from there on, I think, is big. The other thing was, even though the 2005 process, ended up at a referendum, but I couldn't help getting a reminder of the 2005 moment and this one. Both of them government-led projects, and both of them, failing in such spectacular fashion. It'll be very interesting to see what goes forward. But for me, it was just how categorical the judgment was on each of those matters, and what a repudiation it was of this entire process, not just the content, but the process of the formulation of the bill.
And then there was something else. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I could tell that the judges picked on something that's very interesting that I think will kind of be part of this conversation for some time. And it was this idea, first of all, that the Constitution has a certain basic structure. That you do not go just tinkering with any part of the Constitution without thinking about how then that affects the original intent of the people as they went to vote for the Constitution in 2010. And also they talked about some unamendable clauses, because there's been this sense that you can amend any part of the Constitution as long as it is going to a referendum. But they're saying no. Even how you trigger what to amend is very important. It's part of that. And to the extent that they brought this out as part of the ongoing jurisprudence going forward now in terms of how people think about this Constitution that we passed, it's really, really profound that they're saying that don't tell us that you're going to amend this and the other without telling us how that affects or not the intention that people had when because you can amend one and then it collapses something elsewhere, and therefore the original intent of Wanjiku gets lost. And they really focused on this Wanjiku story throughout this judgment.
In fact, sorry, just to add on that, Justice Odunga said Kenyans intended to protect the Constitution from what he called perilous amendments. I took note of that when they were talking about the structure and how you can amend the Constitution. Sorry, Linus.
And the question of Linus, as you come in, who is Wanjiku? Who is Wanjiku?
Okay.
Is the president Wanjiku?
And who qualifies to be called Wanjiku?
Right, and if I can just remind Kenyans, maybe Wanjiku was a term that was coined by President Daniel Arap Moi when he said that Parliament should actually take its role of making the laws, because Wanjiku anajua nini. What does she understand? But then remember, the Constitution of Kenya 2010 was written with Moi and his time, Jomo Kenyatta and his time on the side mirror. It was precisely because of the conduct of affairs in the manner that BBI has been carried out that the Constitution of Kenya 2010 came about. It was written in such a way that it withstands the habits of the past. And that is why when the judges educated us on the basic structure that must follow 4 processes. You must have civic education. You must have public participation. You also must have a constituent assembly debate. And then finally, referendum. So you don't go shake hands on the stairs of Harambee House, call a few people to Bomas of Kenya, form a team, write a draft, pass it, and go to the referendum. They have really faulted the process that we've seen here today. And it should be mentioned as well that this ruling comes as a surprise, considering the prevailing environment. There is this environment of compliance that we've not seen in very many years. There is also, we must say, an environment of fear and intimidation, where people really no longer stand for what they used to stand for. When you look at Parliament, when somebody like James Orengo, when somebody like Otiende Amolo are browbeaten, to the point of, they have to plead somehow for mercy. We are in an environment where BBI is pushed by such strong political forces that the assumption was made that nobody will stop it on the way. In fact, the discussion tonight, and you can see it emerging already, is what will happen in the
Court of Appeal.
Court of Appeal. Do these big political forces have the say there? But here is a court of 5 judges who based their arguments on sound reasoning, the law. They demonstrated to us. You remember the opening by Odunga, very long in terms of how we've changed the constitution before and how this process doesn't seem to match what we've done in the past in terms of changing the constitution. So the debate now is, what is the Court of Appeal going to do? And the eyes will move to the next. You know, there's some changes there because Justice Ouko now moves to Supreme Court. What that means is Justice Wanjiku Karanja will be she's the acting president of the Court of Appeal right now, and then she will have to constitute the bench that will listen to the appeal. But look, the High Court has thrown it with a sling. And you know what? For where you grew up, Joe, you know the strength of a stone that is thrown by a sling. Because the ruling is heavy in substance, heavy in reasoning, that one will wonder, what is that the Court of Appeal will find to fall to this?
You know that sling, when it throws a stone, you don't see it coming until it hits.
And a lot of people didn't see this one coming as well. So that is the Court of Appeal. Here is something else we need to be looking at, the Supreme Court, because you have to look at the entire landscape. In the Supreme Court now we have Justice Kome presumptively becoming the CJ. You know, we followed the vetting today. I didn't see anything that will stop her from being confirmed as the next Chief Justice. And this may land on her desk as the first assignment. But people will be judging the next courts not by politics, but by substance. Because what the High Court has done, what these 5 judges have done, is to take this country out of that, what do you call it, euphoria, the political euphoria that has been there, and tell them, look, yes, you want to change the constitution, yes, you can change the constitution whenever you want, but 257 is reserved for Wanjiku. A Kenyan, an ordinary Kenyan who has no other route, who has no other option when they want to change their constitution. The president has so many options, and they actually did mention that the parliamentary process, through the Attorney General, can actually, the president can trigger a process through that route. And one last issue that here, Joe, before I get back to you, is the question of the Attorney General. Because this is a very serious indictment on the chief legal advisor of the government. How did you make the president walk all this journey purporting to be Wanjiku when he's not? How did the Attorney General fail to miss the simple interpretation the court of the High Court is telling us today, that 257 is not for the president? You don't initiate it as the promoter and then wait for it at the end of it as the person to actually sign and pass it on to IEBC. You can't be umpire, referee, and player at the same time. Very, very serious questions about the performance of the Attorney General in as far as the quality of advice that the president is getting from that office. And this we've raised before, I think, in various discussions around here, because this administration, more than any other previous one, has landed into legal trouble so many times. Basic traffic rules, overtaking, you know, basic offenses that previous administrations did not. I think I mentioned last time, Joe, about one recent former administration where the Attorney General will tell the president, this is what the law says, but what do you want?
What do you want? Now I want us to get back to something here. I know we are already going into what next now, but there is the question of the IEBC, and this whole judgment said some quite interesting things about the IEBC. First of all, the issue that the IEBC itself had already raised, which is I think Article 89, where these new constituencies that we've been talking about, what the BBI did was there's a whole, the second schedule as they call it, which basically the judges trashed and said it is unconstitutional to the extent that it purports to direct the IBC on how to do the delimitation, to the extent that it purports to designate where all these constituencies and whatever should be.
The distribution.
Distribution of these new constituencies. And also even purporting to amend 89.4, I think it is, that gives the IBC those powers. And then this is something that Chebukati himself had raised when he appeared in Parliament, that you know what, this thing, you can't do it. I mean, fine, you can increase even by 1,000, but let us be the ones to figure out where those are going to be. And then secondly, the thing that they said about IBC, which I found quite interesting, is that you can't have a referendum without doing a countrywide voter registration.
Yeah, actually I remember when Chebukati and the two commissioners appeared before the Joint Legal Affairs Committee, he claimed that he was surprised to see the proposal by the BBI team on distribution of the 70 proposed new constituencies, and even actually saying that it's like their role was usurped, their functions were taken over by another entity, and that what the promoters of this process ought to have done is to propose the number of constituencies that would have wanted to create and leave IEBC to determine where those constituencies would be allocated and why, using the parameters that have been set out, population, poverty index, and everything else that is related, and particularly the question of population. Remember, there was that threshold of what constitutes a constituency. How many people constitute a constituency? You remember there was that threshold of 132,000 or thereabout, and so that IBC was insisting that it ought to have been left to determine what happens there. But I found something very interesting in the judgment today, that the composition of IEBC, that even the verification of the signatures, they ought to have been at least 5 commissioners. And you remember, for 3 years, IEBC did not have 4 commissioners who resigned, and so they were operating 3 of them, and questions kept coming up. Did the 4 commissioners resign? Was their resignation received? And what became of the 4 vacancies? Actually, the 4 vacancies were only declared recently, and the process of filling in those 4 vacancies began. The selection panel is on course to recruit the 4 commissioners. But now, there's a question that probably will emerge. What become, if IEBC could not verify the signatures for BBI process because there were 3 as opposed to 5, what happens to everything else that IEBC has done in the last 3 years, including the by-elections that have been conducted, the decisions that they have made? Can one then go to court and say, the by-elections that were conducted, let's say in Machakos, for the senatorial seat, the results are null and void because the commission
was not properly constituted,
did not have a quorum of 5, because there are some decisions that were made insofar as that by-election is concerned, including how it will be funded, how the returning officers will be recruited, basically the procedure. So can one go to court and say, those by-elections, the results, the MPs who are in office, the senators, the MCAs, then their election should be overturned because it was conducted by a commission that is not constitutionally constituted. So I think that is one of the issues that may come up during the Court of Appeal hearing. And then lastly, is it possible for Kenyans to amend the constitution on amendments that touch on the commission itself, on IEBC itself? Can, for example, Kenyans want to amend the constitution and say you want to remove the independence of IEBC? Is it possible? Is it possible to dictate to Kenyans what can be amended and what cannot be amended? I think those are some of the fundamental issues that may likely come up during the Court of Appeal.
Of course, they'll be saying that by the time you're saying that you want to remove the independence of the IEBC, there are certain other things in the Constitution. That basic structure thing is a big deal, and if it's upheld going forward, it's actually going to be a major issue in terms of amending the Constitution. It will not just be enough to collect signatures. There will be the idea that whatever it is that you're trying to amend, does it leave the original structure or intent of the Constitution? Because it is only the people who can trigger the change of the whole thing can even replace it if they want to change those basic structures. But if you are tinkering with things here and there, it still has to conform, at least according to the finding of the 5 judges. Yvonne, you were going to say something about IEBC, including that whole question that verification is not just checking that, oh yeah, they actually 4 million.
Yeah, so they said that to verify is not just to partially look, but to check for accuracy. And the judges went on to define the word verify. And they said verification includes both ascertainment of the numbers as well as confirming authenticity of the signature. So it's not merely just checking the numbers and that, you know, it met the threshold of 1 million plus, but it's that, you know, it goes far beyond that. But then now, I guess some of the questions you ask after that is how would they then go about confirming the authenticity of the signatures? And you remember this issue also came up during the Okoa, Kenya, you know, attempt when they were taking a look at the signatures and you know, the numbers. But for me, what is interesting is that yet again, the courts have found fault with the IEBC. Not too long after 2017, when again the Supreme Court raised issues with the manner in which IEBC conducted itself. And here we are again, and I think we spoke on this show a little earlier about what steps that IEBC has taken in response to the Supreme Court judgment of 2017, where there were some serious indictments on how IEBC had conducted itself. And here we are again with the continuous voter registration exercise, the quorum and its ability to do that. But I also feel that in indicting the IEBC for the decisions that it made concerning this particular process, that it is an indirect indictment on the President of the Republic of Kenya, failing to declare those 4 positions vacant. It took 3 years for that to happen. And in so doing, then crippled IEBC in terms of the quorum. So there's quite a bit that happens there. The other thing I also just wanted to focus on is many aspects of, what was it, the 20 points now that, you know, Professor Ngugi then read out. The ramifications of each of those 20 points that are far-reaching on various other aspects. When you say that the president has failed the integrity test, what does then that mean? How is that to be interpreted going forward? What can be done, you know, as a process towards this? I believe this is one of those grounds for impeachment for the president, failing to safeguard, uphold, and respect the Constitution and failing the integrity test. I believe those are key issues.
I mean, someone can easily then now.
So each of these issues, I think, go there. And one of the things I wanted to perhaps put on the table here is the question of a permanent injunction on the IEBC to conducting a referendum. This is still something that perhaps I am not clear about. Was it perhaps in anticipation of an appeals process where there would be
I mean,
seeking to do that?
For as long as there is no order from any higher court, then the IEBC cannot do anything.
But it's specific to referendum, isn't it?
Yes,
but they can continue to conduct other by-elections, possibly even the general election.
Yeah, they can. But this is something that I think is very interesting. I mean, earlier on, Yvonne, you read a tweet from the Deputy President talking about saying praise God and God is great or something. But I think one of the things that he probably will be feeling like these judges vindicated him was the whole idea of multiple choice referendum, the idea that each of these 74 proposals should actually be presented to the people as individual questions. Because they were saying that separate questions because they are saying that, you know, supposing I like A and I don't like B and whatever, then I can lose all or get all and whatever. They were saying that basically there's a sense in which there isn't a real choice, and the people who want and the people who don't want might end up being lumped together. That is bound to be quite a conversation too.
Yes, Joe, and I think for the political elite, it's been a short 3 or 4 years now since that September 1 ruling nullifying the presidential election by the Supreme Court, which was received, and this is the irony of our political leaders. And now, today it's the Deputy President invoking God, said something like God is Do we have the tweet here?
Yeah,
there's a God in heaven who loves Kenya immeasurably.
May God's name be praised.
May God's name be praised forever. Now, this is the same God David Maraga, Chief Justice, spoke of before nullifying the election and saying it had not been conducted according to the law and the constitution, and for which the deputy president and the president went hammer and tongs against. And here they stand tonight in opposite sides. And I would also want to see the face of ODM leader Raila Odinga, for example, on this night, where, and I listened to Professor Sihanya, who was in the petition in 2017.
That's right.
Remember the two rulings, the one similarity they both have is just a reminder to us, that when you're engaging on matters of law, process matters. Don't just come with numbers that you have the president and you have the ODM leader working together. So, you know, our bulldozer is ready to change the constitution. Give way. You don't do that. And that's what the court told us in 2017 and is telling us tonight in the High Court. Those similarities will be struck. And Joe, I found the composition of the bench something that we must really talk about, because you look at these judges and they all come out as capable of high levels of independence and acting independently. Because basically these days, what happens is you look at a judge and say, would they be swayed by the state? Because normally it is the state that is at all times trying to sway the decisions of judges, not regular folk, not Wanjiru. No, oh, is it Wanjiku? Wanjiru can also try that. What we've seen is, you know, we have Professor Joel Ngugi, who now read the declarations at the end, and you can see the delivery of that.
It was quite eloquent.
Yes, we have Justice Odunga, who is also one of the judges in the list of 41, now 40, that is supposed to move to the Court of Appeal. We also do have Justice Madeka from the Lands Office, and Justice Chacha Mwita, who is also very known for independent decisions, and
Jairus
Nga. Now, here is the other irony. This bench was constituted by Acting Chief Justice Mwilu. I don't know what you want to do with that information, Joe.
but you know, Professor Ben Sihanya, who we were speaking to a little bit earlier, actually said that this was a very strong bench. He said actually, he admitted, even though he disagreed with their decision, he said these are some of the judges you can find anywhere in Africa, he said.
Yeah, interesting. But now focus shifts from what the 5 judges have told us to what the judges in the Court of Appeal will tell us. Because I would imagine by now, speaking to some of the lawyers who were representing the other parties opposing this petition, they're saying they're already working on a notice of appeal. And Paul Mwangi was in court. And this evening they were still trying to make some applications. But what is also interesting is that the Court of Appeal is currently very thin. There are about 12 Court of Appeal judges. Now, with the absence of Justice Ouko, Justice Martha Koome, you're talking about Justice Roslyn Ambuye, Wanjiru Karanja, Hannah Okwengu, Mohamed Warsame, Milton Makandia, Daniel Musinga, Patrick Kiage, Gatembu Kairu, Kathurima Mtoinoti, Agnes Murgo, Fatma Sichale, Jamila Mohamed, not ours, and Sankale Olekantai. So, and some of the judges who are supposed to be appointed, part of the 40, was it 41 now, 40 because one died, a good number of them were going to the Court of Appeal. So you can imagine now there's also another struggle to, you know, to constitute a bench there. And it will be also interesting to see what will happen at the Supreme Court in the event this matter ends there. I wouldn't be surprised if next week the National Assembly convenes a special sitting to discuss the nomination of Justice Martha Koome to be Chief Justice, and probably by the end of next week she will be sworn in as Chief Justice. And so her first assignment will be particularly to deal with this matter if it leaves the Court of Appeal. So I think we are in for a longer process than probably we see now. Listening to some of these lawyers, they're saying the High Court has said what it has said. Now let's hear what the Court of Appeal will say. And thereafter, let's hear what the Supreme Court will say. So I see a scenario where this matter will end up at the very highest. And then that raises questions. What becomes of the timelines that were raised by the BBI team? Is it still possible to hold a referendum by August? By the look of what has happened today, even if you're to give the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court time if this matter ends there, you're talking about several months. Give IEBC another period to prepare for the same, talking about a few other more months. So is it possible to conduct a referendum by the end of this year?
Yeah.
Looks very...
And I wanted to just raise something about...
if you don't conduct it this year, then
what happens next year?
And then there's also the whole question, if this proceeds, if the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court eventually allows the process to continue, there is the creation of 70 new constituencies, the boundaries delimitation,
even closer
some very emotional issues that come up as a result of this. And bearing in mind that it will be so close to a general election, I see some challenges in the timelines as stated.
And probably even more court cases that might arise out of that.
Yeah, and I just want to talk about, the what next and the timelines we're speaking about. So even when we consider an appeal, they would need to wait for that decree from the High Court, getting the summary of the judgment. That could take a few days, and make their application at the Court of Appeal, and, wait for a constitution of a bench at the Court of Appeal. And, it's quite a bit of documentation involved, because remember, these were several petitions, close to 10, that were collapsed into one. So this is not something that can be done in just, about a day or two. And then, by the time you see what happens there, and then the Court of Appeal would then have to sit, make a determination on the matter. Let's assume, at the Court of Appeal that, the proponents of the BBI bill have their say. What happens with IEBC? They would need another 90 days to prepare for that. That's 3 months, taking us towards the end of the year. And don't forget that even then, they can be a further appeal at the Supreme Court of Kenya. So definitely, August not looking likely in the process. And like we said, the delimitation of boundaries also, there's cases there. And I believe there was also another court case, I think that was filed yesterday, regarding whether IEBC can conduct this referendum, considering that, the rights of the voters in the diaspora. So there's bound to be several other pieces of litigation that will come up, I think, as a result of this process. Don't forget, there was the drama about which bill was the correct one, and whether indeed the threshold of the 24 counties was met, even though we have this judgment today. But don't forget, there's quite a bit that will happen at the courts. And I think, like we've always said, regardless of what happened in Parliament, in National Assembly, and at the Senate, the court was the final, decider on this matter. For me, I think it would just be interesting to see the reaction of those, how many, 286 members of the National Assembly that passed this, and how many at the Senate? They achieved a majority that has, never been seen. We were saying this last week. So what does this say now about, some of these other bodies? I know they were not mentioned in the judgment, but it really does start to speak to the role of Parliament as a whole, and whether they were also used to rubber stamp and push this process through unconstitutionally.
But they did establish something important. I think the idea that the county assemblies and Parliament cannot amend. I think that there was a whole debate going on, and there were people who had even proposed some amendments in the Senate. I think there were 3 senators who had proposed amendments there. And so the court basically establishing that principle that, this thing will come, you reject it as it is, or you accept it as it is. And I think that's something that any court, I think, will agree with going forward. I don't think that will be a point of contention any longer. Linus?
Yeah, I was just noting that there are voices from Linda Katiba that really celebrating this night. There is a tweet there, I don't know whether we have it, of Martha Karua saying that today's ruling is a great affirmation to constitutionalism and the rule of law. Abdikadir Mohammed saying that every Kenyan should savor this moment and celebrate the Kenyan judiciary. Make no mistake, it took courage. Just look at the national shame that is the National Assembly and the Senate of Kenya. And this is what I was referring to when we talk of the atmosphere of fear and intimidation, because we saw the National Assembly and we saw the Senate completely incapable of making a decision on their own. And they have acted this way from the days way back when they were changing leaders, majority leader, minority whips. You know, it's been done the same way. Political brawn, you know, it's about muscle. It's not really about a process. And this is why this BBI has fallen short in court, because it couldn't survive the test of procedure. How has it been working all along? Very, very serious indictment in terms of the process. And then, of course, Joe and Tim, questions will be asked. What will happen now going forward on the political side, where we have President Uhuru Kenyatta and we have former Prime Minister Raila Odinga as the promoters of BBI. What are their options?
Don't Kipkorir says something that probably they will be saying as you are asking. He says 5 million signatures were collected, 43 counties passed it, National Assembly and Senate passed it with majority. To overturn this will be a judicial coup clothed in semantics.
Absolutely, absolutely. And here they are right now, regardless the next stages, whether it's going to Court of Appeal and then eventually the Supreme Court, there are political questions and political ramifications that will arise out of this ruling. Because the coalition, if I can call it that, or the brotherhood was really cemented by BBI. This Building Bridges initiative. And what came out, especially from remarks by Otiende Amolo last week, is the Raila Odinga side is also in BBI because of the promise that then is supposed to come out in 2022. Then does this vindicate us here when we argued that sometimes Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga confused what should have been a coalition arrangement with a constitution-making process? Because on coalition making, you can go to Bomas, do all those colorful things, get a few lawyers to draft the arrangement and work together. But now you have this constitution review process that is then declared unconstitutional by the courts.
But it does breathe some oxygen into the Tanga team that had been quite deflated through all these processes that have been going on. At least they'll have some talking points this week. I mean, these days people can't go to funerals and make speeches, but I mean, I would imagine that if we are in that period when rallies, weekend rallies and funerals and all these things were allowed, we would have had quite some loud statements this weekend, Francis.
I would think so. In fact, tomorrow you can expect a series of huge press conferences telling the country, we told you, this is what the court has said, so we have been vindicated. Those are some of the sentiments that probably you'll hear from some.
Urging the IBC to do something, or the president and the prime minister to stop this, or something. There will be some statements. You
will hear such sentiments tomorrow from the Tanga wing of the political divide. But it has been an uncomfortable few months for them, right from the county assemblies, where 43 voted in favor, 3 voted against, 1 abstained. In the National Assembly, looked like a whitewash. 235 in the second round, in the second reading, 83 voting no and 1 abstaining. In the second round, 224, 63 and 1. And then in the Senate, the numbers were even bigger. So it's been an uncomfortable, let's say, 3, 4, 5 months for the Tanga team, insofar as this question is concerned, basically when you look at the political optics. But you see, constitution making process is both a political and legal process. That which probably they didn't get in numbers at in the county assemblies and in parliament, you would say they have gotten in the High Court. But now the ball now moves to the Court of Appeal. And by the way, Joe, I was just looking at the whole hullabaloo about the appointment of judges, and it reminded me that 11 of the 41 judges were to go to the Court of Appeal. You remember Francis Tuiyot, Helen Omondi, Pauline Nyamoya, Weldon Korir, Mbogoli Msaga, Agri Muchelule, Dr. Kibaya Laibuta, Jesse Lesit, Grace Mumbi Ngugi, George Odunga, who was part of this team, as well as Professor Joel Ngugi, who was also part of this team. So
he'd have saved himself a bit of trouble if they had pushed them to the Court of Appeal. Who knows?
Who knows? Yeah, indeed. I think for me, it's what are the conversations going to be like now within the ODM party? We remember those who had raised certain issues and reservations, with
and
process and content. Issues, it was these exact issues that have been, quite properly elucidated by this 5-judge bench. What are the conversations that are going to be within the Jubilee Party? You remember, there was a sense that you toe the line or you leave, and there was lots of disciplinary measures that we saw, exercised upon people, including Irungu Kangata, who was the whip, and several others. So what are the conversations that are going to be happening in these respective camps, and where does this leave the handshake? As Lina has talked about, it seemed like this was the culmination of that handshake in March of 2018. This was the whole process. They had the 9-point agenda, then the BBI task force was created and gazetted, and then they came up with ways to amend the constitution, and now here we are. And we'd even heard the ramblings already within ODM saying, the promises are not being kept and there's interference in that whole process. So, where do we go from here? I think politically that'll be something interesting to see. And then I think also IBC needs to take a real hard look at itself. And perhaps with now the selection process for the replacement of the 4 commissioners will be now the next thing to watch, because what happens now going forward, the courts have been quite categorical on a number of issues with this particular administration. And also keen to see obedience of court orders. This administration, as I have pointed out on my take, I think not once, not twice, and it's obedience to court orders. Where does that go from here? And they have been cited time and again, including by the former Chief Justice.
It was Maraga's last cry.
It was Maraga's last cry,
but I think also just looking at what happens now, when the higher courts will be dealing with this thing, I think these judges have raised very serious fundamental constitutional questions that I think the entire country will be watching to see just what is that reasoning that comes from the Court of Appeal that overturns this. I mean, it will be quite interesting. They've established certain basic yet fundamental constitutional principles that I think people who study legal trends, jurisprudence, and all that kind of thing will actually be looking at it very keenly to see what is that reasoning that will challenge, for example, the finding that this process needed to have gone through civic education, public participation, constituent assembly debate before the referendum. What is that reasoning that will challenge the finding that they had that the IEBC needed to have conducted voter registration, for example, or the finding civic education as well, and the finding that those constituencies you can't pre-allocate them and then just hand over to the IEBC, where is the independence. So there's going to be a whole range of constitutional questions that the courts that take this from here on will really have to deal with, and I think a lot of people will be watching to see how they get out of this if they so choose to overturn this ruling.
And this, we must say, we're also making an assumption that there'll be an appeal. Is there a possibility that there'll be no appeal in the Court of Appeal and they decide to leave it at that?
Highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely. Highly unlikely. And
Professor Sihanya even, hinted at it this
He said
evening.
it should be appealed immediately.
Yeah.
Actually, this evening, I spoke to Paul Mwangi, and he told me they were trying to make certain applications, and I would think it was in preparation for the appeal at the Court of Appeal. And some of those lawyers who were on the BBI team, they were saying the 5 judges have even gone past some of the prayers that were sought in the petitions, and so they're saying that is one of the grounds they will be using to appeal. And then secondly, speaking to some of them, they were asking, so what becomes of the Kenyan people's right to amend the constitution? That the drafters of the constitution envisaged a situation where it can be amended. So is there a way the court can limit what can be amended and what cannot be amended? Those are some of the issues that I suspect will likely come up during that appeal.
And tomorrow is a holiday. Does that affect?
Yeah.
Tomorrow is a holiday, so maybe the earliest you can see is Monday.
That's right, yeah.
Is Monday, but it will be very interesting to hear what Paul Mwangi and the other BBI team, especially the National Secretariat, Junet Mohammed, Dennis Waweru, will have to say about it. But maybe even flip the coin. Could this also be a slight loss of momentum for the BBI process that probably they would want to recoup through the Court of Appeal and maybe Supreme Court and regain that momentum? Those are some of the interesting things that you look at, because there's the politics and there's the law. So let's see how the two interlock.
And it's the law that won today and not the politics.
Not the politics,
it is the law that really strictly won. And one would assume that is what the appellants will also stick to the law, go to the substance and the substantive arguments that were made by the High Court today, and argue blow by blow on the about 20 or so declarations that were made today. The unfortunate thing for the next 2 levels, that is the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court, is there'll be this cloud of politics that will hang over their heads.
So whichever decision they make will be looked at that in that context. It
doesn't matter, because even the constitution of the next bench, people will be looking at it and saying, how will Judge so-and-so rule, and how will this other judge go? Because unfortunately that has been the trend in our politics. And even you saw in 2017 where efforts were made to actually brand judges and give them a political affiliation. This will happen in the Court of Appeal, and this will happen in the Supreme Court. And I say that this is a heavy burden on the shoulders of Martha Koome, if confirmed next week as Chief Justice, because for those who support tonight's decision, any reversal, either by the Court of Appeal or by the Supreme Court, will be seen as a political hatchet job, pure and simple, unless they find a way of telling Kenyans that yes, it's okay, there was a quorum at IEBC. Oh yes, it's okay, the president did not violate the law. Oh yes, it's okay, the president can act as Wanjiku. Those are the things that...
or that it is not okay, but it did not nullify the process. I mean,
and just important to note around the table that the judgment was unanimous.
Yeah. It was unanimous.
All 5 agreed on it, and it was so systematic, you could tell it was a handover. This was one judgment written unanimously by all 5. That was just something that...
And a sobering reminder tonight of the genius of the whole idea of separation of powers, and the fact that each of the 3 arms of government have their place, and once in a while someone needs to check the other person and bring them back to a place where people can reflect on the decisions they make and know that there is nobody who is above the law, that actually at the end of the day everybody can be asked to account for what they've done, and that they also have a route through which they can question those decisions, and it keeps going. And I think that's really the beauty of a working constitution, and that's something that many people should be able to celebrate, whatever their view is about the ruling tonight. I think we really need to end this here. This was a special edition of News Gang, starting a little late because of the dramatic developments that we witnessed in the courts today. But now we have to take this home, as Jamila would say. And Jamila, Eid Mubarak. Jamila is on an Eid break, and we really miss her tonight. And we hope we can get some biryani and pilau when it's all done. Let's take this home, and tonight we'll start with Kai Kai's Kika.